Hi everyone, welcome back to the main agenda of the Uncovered conference. At this point, I also want to give a warm welcome to our audience at Alex Berlin, which is joining us, so welcome. Of last year. They will tell us the behind-the-scenes story. The investigation, of course, has also been shortlisted for the ICIJ for EU Impact Award. And now, without further ado, I'm happy to hand it over to the chair of this panel, Catherine Gill. She's the director of the grants programs at the European Journalism Center. Catherine, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all well. I think we have almost 50 people with us today. So thanks very much for joining this session and for your time. So we're going to be speaking across the panelists for about 45 minutes in general. Half an hour of that will be a conversation between the panelists with me asking questions. And then at the end, for the last 15 minutes, we will be opening up to people in the audience to ask questions as well. So hopefully it'll go smoothly and we don't have any technical glitches, but we'll be well looked after, I'm sure, if we do. So to, I guess, basically introduce this session. So we're going to be talking about the FinCEN Files, which was an investigation published in 2020 that revealed the role of global banks in an industrial scale money laundering. That was an investigation delivered by ICIJ News and 108 other news organizations from 88 countries, which of its kind was the largest ever cross-border investigation. And of course, it's very fitting for the theme of this conference overall and of the project that this conference sits within, which is ICIJ4EU, because the whole focus of that is cross-border investigations and the collaborative approach of those and sort of how these networks come about. So I will introduce my panel. First of all, we have Fergus Schill, who's managing editor at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, so ICIJ. We have Ariel Cameron, global investigations editor at Buzzfeed News, and Eva Young, who is the investigative journalist at Belinks, which is a Danish organization. So to kick off, so I'm first going to let the panel introduce themselves a little bit more in detail about their work and their background and you know, a few points that they'll speak about before we go into some of the other questions. So Fergus, I'll hand over to you.
So I'm Fergus Schill, I'm the managing editor of ICIJ. ICIJ is a Washington-based not-for-profit, most famous for the Panama Papers and Paradise Papers. And we have a team ourselves of about 40 people scattered around the world, mostly in Washington, but also in Paris, Madrid, London, and elsewhere. And we work with hundreds of reporters around the world on projects each year to deliver what we hope is the best investigative reporting in the public interest.
Thanks. And over to Ariel.
I'm Ariel Cameron, and I oversee the investigative reporting team at Buzzfeed News. We have 16 people within the newsroom who do investigations. We're also investigations with a global reach, and this was our first collaboration of this kind. And I mean, I suppose in a certain way it was, according, Fergus says it was the biggest collaboration of its kind anywhere. It was certainly a novel experiment for us, and I guess we'll talk more about that.
And over to Eva.
Hi everyone, so happy to be here today. My name is Eva Young. I represent a newspaper called Berlingske, one of Denmark's or even the world's oldest newspapers dating back to 1749. We have a team of 5 investigative reporters, and working with the FinCEN Files was our very first project with the ICIJ. So we were 2 reporters from Berlingske working on this. And Catherine, I'd be happy to elaborate a bit on what we worked with, what kind of stories we did with the FinCEN Files.
Right.
So,
yep, go ahead.
Okay, so you know a lot of stories about dark money flows, money laundering is all about company structures. It's about offshores. It's about secretive layers. It can be quite difficult to make interesting for people and for the readers. It can be very complicated. But I think what the FinCEN Files was actually to give us some quite clear answers to a story, especially that we at Berlingske have been very interested for a few years, that we work with on for a few years. It's a story about money laundering at Danske Bank, Denmark's biggest bank. It's one of the biggest known money laundering cases in history by now. It was the case of money laundering at the Estonian branch of Danske Bank, and it's currently being investigated by several US bodies and several European authorities as well. So what the FinCEN Files were able to do was to give us some quite clear answers to, for instance, who were these customers at the bank? Who was it that sent their money through the Estonian branch of Danske Bank? What was possible since Danske Bank did not live up to the regulation? And one of the guys that we wrote about was a world famous Pakistani money launderer called Altaf Kanani. He is known to launder money from organized crime groups, drug trafficking organizations, even terrorists. And he's also a man who received 6 years of prison for his dark deeds. So what we were able to find in the FinCEN Files was that some of the companies that he used for his money laundering was actually sending money through Danske Bank in Estonia. So I think that was a very clear example of what is possible, what kind of crime is possible if you don't follow money laundering regulation as a financial institution. And I have another example of a story that we found in the FinCEN Files. If you'd like me to elaborate, Catherine.
Okay, we may have time to get onto that in a little bit. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. First question from me for Ariel is, I understand that Buzzfeed News, made the decision to share the leaked documents with ICIJ and to go about this project in a really collaborative way. So what was it about Buzzfeed News' decision to share the files with ICIJ? And a sort of a second question on the back of that is, what other options or approaches did your organization consider about how to handle the documents and how to share them?
Thanks for asking. We definitely did not come to the thought of sharing with ICIJ or anybody else right out of the gate. When we first gained access to this extraordinary trove of documents, not one of which was ever supposed to be available in the public domain, we started just kind of reading our way through it and picking out individual stories based on individual documents, and looking around Trump and his orbit. The people around Trump is not mentioned anywhere in the documents, but people in kind of Trump land are a lot. And so we started kind of peeling off, one or another, and there were You could trace the suspicious movement of funds around the infamous meeting in Trump Tower to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. You could trace the movement of suspicious funds around other things that were happening, proximate to Trump. And that was our focus at first. And we got some good stories out of it, but they were atomized, they were discrete. And they didn't draw any connections among the documents or what they revealed. And also they were all focused in this one part of the world. I told them that, we talked about an enormous pile of data, and would they be interested in sharing? And they said yes. And I said, what? You told who? What? You told anybody about these documents? Not even revealed in any of these stories that we even had one of these documents in our possession. We only said that we had reviewed the single document in the story. And I said, what? But I went into the other room and breathed it into a paper bag. And when I was back to respiration, it turned out to be a great idea. He, of course, had not revealed anything about the contents or the nature of the documents. And we started to see that only really by making this a global project in a way that only ICIJ could ever make possible, could we really see the full potential and trace all of the connections through all of the countries. And the documents name people involved in, figures of power in countries we didn't know about and could never make all those connections. Mm-hmm. So we just saw it. This could be something on a completely different level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And Fergus, then leading on from that, how would you describe this investigation as different to others in terms of scale and involvement and contribution from the range of different news organizations and the number of countries that they were coming from and sort of involved with?
When I think of this investigation, Catherine, I think of sort of like a James Bond character looking at a map full of green lights around the world. And that's how it started. It started with green lights. And then by the end, it was entirely red. There was a crisis in every corner of the world. And what we didn't anticipate, of course, was that COVID was going to come. And that made the whole project extremely difficult. And we were immensely fortunate that we had Buzzfeed as partners because they stayed focused throughout, and I'm immensely fortunate that we have people like Eva on the project and the other partners because they held true in what were some of the most difficult circumstances of any project ever undertaken. I'm sure we had partners getting sick, we had newsrooms closing down, we had people losing their jobs, we had entire organizations disappearing, and as that was going on, we also had to try and make sense of the Buzzfeed documents. And when Ariel and her team came with the documents, we were so grateful, but we were equally immensely skeptical because we could see from the outset there were profound challenges in these documents. ICIJ is used to dealing with enormous numbers of documents, 11, 12 million, no problem. We've taken them on before, and it's just, it's another day at the office. There was only 2,100 of these, and they were hell. Absolute hell. We had 80 people working on them over a year to try to make sense of them, and they were poorly written. They didn't take us places, but the great thing, the fantastic thing, was that Buzzfeed and together with our data team, John and the Buzzfeed reporters, we were able to chart a course which our partners joined us on, and it was a marathon journey to try and extract the information from them, and ultimately we did, and we were able to show profligacy on behalf of international banks of a kind that had never been demonstrated before. So it was a wonderful, challenging, brutal process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thanks. All of you or whoever wants to maybe answer from various different experiences. And I guess it's a sort of a twofold question around, you know, whether particular sort of logistical challenges or challenges with resources and communications and knowledge sharing that you experienced in this project that you hadn't experienced in other sort of cross-border or collaborative projects of maybe a similar size or similar types of organizations. And I'll probably ask that as a first question before I then jump into the second part of it, so not to confuse. But yeah, who would like to start off with that question and give examples of any particular challenges?
Fergus, I feel like that's, I'm going to defer to you.
Okay, I'll give you an example. Maybe this is the easiest way to do it. You know, so you have a document, and the document gives you the names of 4 people and money moving from one place to another. That's it. There's 4 people on that document, and you have to try and produce a story out of that. And so what we did was then we took those 4 names and we put them into Google, and we found out a little bit about them, and then we found court cases about them, and then we went from the court cases to the individuals, and then we talked to people in prison, and ultimately here's the names. And so that, and what we were able to do was we were able to pull in 80 reporters to look at these figures alone, and to do that over a year. And those reporters were so amazing that they were able to find a death on a trawler off the coast of Mauritania. They were able to find $1 million moving from Turkmenistan to Scotland. They were able to find a Ponzi scheme that had $1 billion had moved through Hong Kong, and that led to the death of a man in a Californian vineyard. And this is what investigative journalism is about. This is what Buzzfeed did. This is what Eva did. This is what our partners did. And it was extremely difficult. And as well as that, some fabulous reporters, including Simon Bowers and Carrie Keogh and Tom Moran and others, were looking at LLPs and LPs in London, and they were comparing the Shell company data out of UK Companies House with the FinCEN Files, which again was extremely onerous to demonstrate what a profound problem the UK has with Shell companies. And so it was, and all of this was going on at the time that newsrooms were falling over. It was going over at the time, it was happening at the same time as Black Lives Matters was happening in the US. There were, here in DC, there were boarded up buildings and riots. And it was, you know, it was a really challenging project, but amazing things came out of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'll also just add that we, you know, we had to, we rescheduled the original date when the pandemic swept through, and every newsroom was completely 100% consumed. And there was some fear that we might not be able to hold the coalition together at all. Everybody was getting pulled off to cover, you know, the biggest story, maybe of our, you know, of our memory. Luckily, I don't know that we lost anybody outright. People got pulled off, but returned. You know, that was unforeseeable, obviously, for us and the rest of the world. I would also just add to Fergus's very eloquent description of how onerous it was to unpack. None of our reporting relied exclusively on the documents. The wire transactions are, of course, you know, they are what they are, but all of the descriptive elements in these documents, they were just written by people, bank's compliance department, and they're as fallible as anybody else. Mm-hmm. So all of the reporting that we published was backed up by all the stories that we published, I should say, were backed up by, you know, old-fashioned reporting, you know, with sources and knocking on people's doors and getting, you know, court documents, as Fergus mentioned. And so as onerous as the challenge was of unpacking it, that was truly just the first step in what was the journey of I mean, all told, it was a year and a half for these organizations around the world.
It was a really difficult conversation I'm having with Ariel when she told me that she wanted to delay it for the second time, where I had told Ariel that delaying it once was bad and delaying it twice was impossible. And so that's what we had to do. And it was
the smile in your
understandable.
was not, it was absent at that time. Yeah.
It was understandable because Ariel had Anthony were in Queens, and at that stage, Queens was COVID central, or, you know, it was like, it was hell. It was hell. It was absolute hell.
Maybe also a relevant comment for working on big leaks in general as an investigative journalist. I mean, journalists love big troves of documents, right? The more documents, the better. But it can also be overwhelming, especially if the documents are difficult to understand, as some of these SARS, for instance, were. So I think a tip from my point of view when working with big troves of documents for investigative reporters would also be, of course, ICIJ was a huge help of sort of going through, finding lots of different themes that were of interest to almost all reporters in the project. But I would also say, once you've had some time to sort of go through what are the different corners of the documents, find your own sort of subjects that you're interested in, because otherwise it can be a very overwhelming project to work on too many subjects at one time. So find the specific spots that you want to be an expert in the specific project. I think that helped it for us to not be too overwhelming when working with a big project like this. And I think you're very right in saying that a league like this is a starting point. So I think we had some very great colleagues, for instance, in Italy at Espresso or at Süddeutsche. We also had some great colleagues that were able to actually find different leaks or leads in the FinCEN files, and then go out and get even more documentation on these specific subjects that they had an interest in. And that just shows it's sort of starting point to go and do some shoe leather reporting on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And following on from that, so it's obviously really important and beneficial to have a network of journalists and a network of news organizations in various countries already established, and whether it was via the likes of ICIJ or through other means, so you can effectively launch these types of investigations very quickly without spending so much time trying to understand, you know, who's out there and who would want to get involved. And I guess maybe a question more for Eva, but also for Ariel as well, around, you know, are there particular top tips or sort of advice that you would give people in the audience for collaborating with other news organizations and freelance journalists? You know, if you were to start a next investigation or a new investigation, you know, what would you say are the top things that you would need to have in place in order to make effective cross-border and collaborative projects come to fruition?
I guess I would say the first, it's sort of an obvious, since it would apply to any kind of collaboration in any setting, is to set out the rules clearly so that everybody joins the group with the same understanding of how things will play out. I'm very happy that, I mean, obviously this is not the first time that ICIJ has like this, although this may have been on an unprecedented scale, and Fergus guided us through that, you know, very ably. But it would have been impossible if we were trying to negotiate the terms while the reporting was already underway. And, you know, I feel it is incredibly cool. It's flat. You know, the organization is really flat, and it's built on everybody having total visibility into one another's work, against all the instincts that we've been, trained to develop about, competitiveness and hoarding your scoops, total visibility. We could all see not only what the other news organizations, the other reporters were reporting on, we could actually see the reporting in real time, people posting their memos, their findings. Hey, what's this? Did you see this? Did you make this connection? Never been a part of anything like that before. But nobody has, though we all have visibility, nobody has any control over anything that anybody else is reporting or publishing. If you think that the guys in, Latvia are publishing something that is completely 1000% and is going to get them sued and discredited and laughed out of the continent, you can say so, but you have no control whatsoever. And that the paradox of total visibility and zero control is a sort of a counter model, and also a really great model that I found, just an amazing model for collaborations even beyond journalism that I've really thought about a lot.
Great, thanks. And Eva?
Yeah, I would maybe also call it trust. It's the same, I guess it's the same thing Ariel is saying. When you work on collaborations like this, of course, you need to sort of figure out if you don't have ICIJ vetting your colleagues for you, then you'll have to figure out some other way of vetting your colleagues. So figure out it's someone you can trust, so that you can share actually the information that you have with them, and that you're also pretty sure that they have some sort of same ethical standards as yourself. But then otherwise than that, I also believe in not too many rules, sort of deciding, of course, don't show your material to anyone that we haven't decided on together, and then maybe just a particular date of when to publish. And then of course all of the collaboration until that publication date is very important, as Ariel says, to keep a complete openness about what you found, so that you can work together on these different leads. I also, of course, think it's important to have some sort of closed network, an encrypted place to talk about your investigation and to share that information that you have. I'm sure a lot of people following this panel know about different sorts of communication that's encrypted, so that might be PGP or Signal or other types of communication. That's it's the basis of where you should start, just to make sure you have control of those different encrypted communication platforms. And then after that, of course, finding some sort of way of communicating also about the leads and everything, which can be done also on a platform. I've been lucky to work with the ICIJ and the OCCRP, who had platforms like this. So I haven't actually figured out where to find one besides that, but maybe someone has a tip in the panel or in the chat or something.
Great, thanks. And I'm conscious that we've got a few more minutes left before we then go to the audience, but I have tried to get 2 more questions in. And again, this could apply for any of you. Are there other sort of news organizations or freelance journalists that now, because of the investigation, have come into your realm or into your network that you've never worked with before, but now that you've worked with them, you know that it's an organization or freelancers that you would work with again in the future, whether they could bring particular expertise or particular knowledge, or they're from a specific country that has advantages for sort of future work. So I don't know if anyone in particular can answer that, or everyone can.
I guess I'll jump in just to say, BuzzFeed News Investigations team doesn't really do many collaborations, if any collaborations other than this, but I was so impressed. I was so impressed by the work of everybody that we came into contact with. Of course, I didn't meet or interact with every reporter on this huge project, but we were all just really floored by the amazing level of work that is being done in so many around the world. And in particular, for me, what was very moving, we all got together in Hamburg a year before we published to kick the project off. And there I met people who were doing extremely hard-hitting investigative work in settings where they had none of the legal protections, that my team enjoys, constitutional or otherwise. And I met people who were, really literally putting their lives on the line to do this kind of work. And I found that just very, very, to be involved in a project with them was very moving to me personally.
Thank you. And Eva or Fergus, did you want to add?
Yeah, what's really, really satisfying and inspirational is when you work with reporters in countries where, as Ariel said, they have literally no resources. There are reporters such as Aloysius David, I'll give you a name, in Liberia. He does not have a publication. He writes his stories, he puts them on his phone, he sends them to a nearby country where they are published because it's too dangerous for him to publish in his own country. And currently in Niger, there's one of the reporters who's on the FinCEN Files is continuing with stories into defense contracts that have caused chaos in that country. And the bravery that goes into those stories is just, it's phenomenal. It's incredible. And going back to what Eva said, it's all about trust. It's all about trust and friendship and having a shared commitment to investigations in the public interest. And it's an absolute pleasure to work with so many people who care so much.
Thank you. And Eva, anything for you on that question? No, that's okay. I'll ask one more really quick question, and then we can go on to the chat to see if there's anyone from the audience that would like to participate as well. So I know that there's a podcast for the investigation, and what would you say, I guess this is for Ariel, but anyone else could jump in here as well. What would you say is the benefit of publishing the investigation across various platforms or sort of more creative platforms? And do you think that there's been a benefit not only for audiences to engage in different ways, but also benefits for the collaboration? And, it was the thinking behind something like the podcast just for audiences that you're trying to get to engage with the content, or was it also for the benefit of, the partners as well?
Yeah, the podcast was, the inspiration was just on the most basic level, just to reach more people who might not see or engage with the articles in the same way, or who might be daunted by an article that's about, obscure financial machinations, although of course we, tried to make them accessible, but this was just a different way of presenting the material and hopefully reaching more people. Obviously much more storytelling, driven by personalities, really showcasing, the two reporters, Anthony Cormier and Jason Leopold, who are the sort of original members of this team, and then the others that added on. But that was just a BuzzFeed News project in terms of the making of the podcast. It happened, mostly towards the end of the project, when everybody, certainly on our team and equally so in all the other newsrooms, I'm certain, they were all so consumed with finishing the project. And so we did, that piece of it was just in-house, as opposed to the rest of it, which was 100% collaborative. And I imagine that all the other news organizations, contemplated, how to maximize their stories as well, and might have done a special video project or an audio project or whatever. That was ours.
Yeah. Okay, great. Eva or Fergus, do you have anything to add onto that? about creative ways to communicate the project?
No, it's just to say the podcast is great. People should listen to it. It's really entertaining, and there are also other podcasts which aren't as fab, but are worth listening to. I think with these projects that you have to throw everything at them. You have to have illustrations. We have illustrations, photos. The only thing I would add is, big projects like this are a mental challenge, and the way to pull them off, whether they're big or small, because most people won't be part of a project that involves 400 people, is to consider them in phases, and to stay calm, and to do urgent tasks urgently, and to consider all tasks urgent, and just to narrow your focus as you go along. And that would be my message to people who are listening to this and thinking, I'm probably not going to do a project that has 400 people in it, but I have a smaller project. And how do you do it? And what I would say is, the message from this is that despite the challenges that you will face, so long as you do it in phases, you'll succeed.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so we should move on to any questions that are coming in from the audience. I think the best way might be for people to put a question in the chat as opposed to coming off mute. Our moderator from ECPMF might tell us otherwise. But if anyone has any questions, and just be mindful that to read the questions in there first if you can, because what we don't want is for people to ask the same question over and over again, because it becomes quite difficult to try and work out which is which. Yeah, so hopefully I'm giving the right information and in letting people add a question to the chat.
Maybe I can just add a point whilst we are waiting. So in order to, we were talking about how to find people to collaborate with, or how to set up a collaboration with other investigative journalists. I think it's also always a good idea to find people to work with that have different skills than yourself. So at Berlingske, we're a very small team of investigative journalists, so we don't have the capacity to do sort of a very big processing of data, for instance. So we need to work with people who know how to process big amounts of data. But then we have some other expertise. Then maybe we can get access to sources or documents or anything like that. So perhaps also think about that next time you try to set up a big investigation. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're still waiting. I'm amazed that people are so shy in asking questions. Usually these panels, in my experience, we're bombarded with people. So I'll give it another minute, and then maybe I can add another question myself if we're not getting any takers.
Perhaps I can just, in the meantime, tell you about another interesting story we found in the FinCEN Files. So we were also able to find a very interesting story about how was the money laundering at Danske Bank made possible. How was this even possible? It was a money laundering case of a large part of 200 billion euros that flowed through the bank. And what was interesting in the FinCEN Files were we were able to read also how the bankers of Estonia were working with clients, helping setting up secretive offshores, and at the same time, these bankers who were receiving moderate pay for being a banker in Estonia, the police found large amounts of money on their private bank accounts. They found expensive jewelry, expensive cars. So that for us was also a new view of what was going on at this and a very concrete way of working in the bank, which was of course something that police is very interested in, this sort of pattern in Estonia.
Okay, thank you. I think we have 2 questions coming in, so I'll just let these people finish typing, and just to let everyone know on the call that we have to finish sharp at 15:45. So we've got 4 minutes for people to finish their questions and for us to answer them. We're under strict orders. I've also been asked by ECPMF in the oh, here we go. I'll ask this one now then. So 31 years after the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and in 2021, the International Year of the Elimination of the Child Labour, tens of millions of children work for corporations to reduce costs and increase profits. I would like you all to consider investigating how many hundreds of thousands of children work for each of the largest corporations in the world. What do you think? I think that's going, that may be very hard to answer with a very short answer from our panelists. I'll just read out the second question now quickly as well. Do you experience difficulties? So what we'll do, we'll start answering the second question just because I think it's going to be easier to give a specific answer to. Do you experience difficulties during the collaboration due to different journalistic practices and ethics internationally? Or is there a global journalism culture that helped while working with the other journalists? So who would like to respond to this question by Ellie? Ariel, go for it.
I don't really have an answer beyond just saying that, you know, this framework that Jay set up that I mentioned before, really let everybody approach this material their way. So there were a lot of shared values, and there were also some, no doubt, some regional differences, and that was fine. That was really the beauty of ICIJ's framework, is any control over what anybody else does. And so whatever regional variations are, they don't get in anybody else's way. You know, everybody's just tackling these stories in the way that they see fit for their audience, for their readers, for their standards.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then just going on to the first question. So if anyone can answer this within 1 minute, or if it's something that you're already exploring with your organizations or your members, then I guess that could be a response as well. Eva,
No.
I think.
I would just say that, of course, stories of for instance, if there was a major Danish company using child labor abroad, of course, this would be an interesting story for us. It's not something that I have worked with intensively with before, but if I ever received a tip or understood that this was the practice of major Danish companies, then of course this is something that I would investigate. And if you have any tips, please feel free to let me know.
Okay, thank you very much. Fernando put the Danish pension funds profit from child labor. So maybe, Fernando, you might want to get in touch with Eva directly through one of her channels to discuss more. So that is the end of this session. Thank you so much for the almost 50 people who have been with us for the last 45 minutes. I hope it was really informative, and you know a bit more about the FinCEN Files, but also a bit more about the collaborative and cross-border nature of this, and sort of any advice that the panelists gave us. So I just want to say thanks again for Ariel, Fergus and Eva for joining us. And I think that's where we now leave the meeting. Remembered not to. Thanks again, everyone, for your time.
And indeed, we're back here in Leipzig. Thank you so much for a very informative session. Indeed, I think I speak for all when I say it was very exciting to hear the behind-the-scenes story of the FinCEN Files and hear from the journalists who were directly involved in these investigations. Thanks also to Catherine, of course, for moderating and chairing that session. So we already have had two wonderful, very informative, insightful sessions. More to come, of course. Always keep your eye on the conference agenda. Next up here in 15 minutes, we will have the panel titled Reporting on Influence, Following the Money Across Borders. That'll take place 15 minutes from now. So whether you are watching us from home or from Alex, Berlin, regardless, it's wonderful to have you with us at this important and timely conference. Stay tuned, don't stray away too far. We'll be back in 15 minutes with more panels to come.